Welcome to Research Talk. I hope you all are doing well and ready for another exciting video on data analysis in qualitative research. As you know, in our previous videos, we started second cycle coding strategies and we discussed pattern coding strategy. Now in this video, I'm going to talk about focused coding strategy, and we'll learn what focused coding strategy is and how we do coding in this method. So as the word itself suggests, focused, and that's what it means when we think about focused coding. We focus on significant codes, the codes which are, in our experience, more powerful. So what we do when you have your let's say your initial codes, so your first cycle of coding strategies, you have, let's say, 20, 30 initial codes that you might get through open coding strategy. Now what you do, out of all those codes, you focus on significant codes. And what I mean here is the codes which have high level of frequency across participant. So let's say I have code A, which is often talked about by all the participants, which is mentioned by all the participants or majority of the participants. So we call it like high level of frequency of that particular code. So the code we called significant because they have a high level of frequency in the data. They are very prominent also. Prominence meaning that they are often referred to, and they seem to have some like important role in understanding the phenomenon that we are investigating. And this code, in our experience, also has more analytic power, meaning that this code has, based on our experience, talking to our research participant and the process of data collection, this code seems to explain, has more power to explain the phenomenon that we are investigating. So that's what I mean when I say you focus on significant codes. So what you start with your initial cycle of coding data. You have, let's say, 20, 30, 40 initial codes. And then you make a list of these codes, look at all these codes, and then you ask yourself, what are the codes that have more power? What are the codes that are frequently appearing across all participants? What are the codes which can explain the phenomenon more deeply, more holistically? And then you choose these codes and you do focus coding on those codes. What it means that you don't focus on all the initial codes. So you're choosing codes which you think are significant, very high level of frequency, very prominent, and has more power, analytic power to explain the phenomenon. So let's say you selected some codes which you think are very significant, and then you go back to the data. Maybe your interview data, or let's say observation data. You go back to the data, you go back to the segment of not excerpt, but the data, the interviews, or maybe the observation data. And look at those segment of data again. And what you do, you try to recode those segments for for its all entirety, holistically, and also with all its complexity. So let's say if this is your code, initial code that you want to focus on and do focused coding. So you look at the, go back to the excerpt of the data and look at this excerpt across all participants, and maybe you could find some maybe more sub-themes within that code. So what you are doing, you are further developing this code with more complexity, holistic approach, with more understanding if there is any sub-themes involved in that code. And so you look at more sort of variations of this code that you see across all the participants. So that's what we do in focused coding. Let's recap it again. So what we do in focused coding, we have the initial codes that we may have got from the open coding. And as you know, initial codings are always more numbers of codes. So maybe in one study, you may have 30 codes or 25 codes, 40 codes. And then you look at all these initial codes and ask yourself, what are the codes that have more power to explain the phenomenon? What are the codes that, based on my interview experience, based on the readings of the data, based on the initial coding, seem to have more frequency across the participant? What are the codes that have more analytic power to explain the phenomenon? And based on those observations, you select certain codes. Next step, you go back to the interview data or observation data and look at the segment of the data where you use this code, and you recode that segment. This time you are looking more deeply, understanding various facets of that particular segment. Try to understand what might be some variation of those codes across all the participants. Try to understand if there is any sub-theme involved in that code or in that primary category. And that you repeat the process with all the codes that you think are significant codes. Let's understand this with an example. So let's take this example. So let's say I'm interviewing parents who have full-time career, and also they are raising kids. And I want to understand the challenges, their, let's say, their daily routine, challenges. I want to understand how how different systems support them. And also I want to understand the strategies these parents are using to cope with all the responsibilities, both the career-related responsibilities as well as being a parent responsibilities. So I'm doing this interview, let's say a focus group interview with these parents, or maybe let's say individual interviews. So, and after my interviews are done, I did transcribe the interviews, and then I did my initial coding. In my initial coding, let's say certain codes emerged, and again these are initial codes. So let's say the first code that emerged was scheduling conflicts. So how parents, when they have a conflict at their workplace, and their personal responsibilities in terms of schedule. Let's say a parent says like they have a parent teacher meeting, and at the same time they have a very important meeting in their office. So all these conflicts related issues. So scheduling conflicts is, let's say, one code. And then another code, let's say childcare arrangement. And then there is another code, let's say employer flexibility. Another code, initial code, let's say family support. Another code is initial code. All these are initial code, stress level. And let's say there is another initial code called personal time. So if parents have personal time for themselves. So these are, and this is just an example. So let's say I did interviews with these parents and try to understand their daily routine challenges, kind of support they are offered, and then what strategies they are using to cope with challenges of balancing their personal life uh, and professional expectations, responsibilities. After the interview, I did my initial coding, and let's say these are some of the initial codes that emerged from the data. And let's say when I have a closer look at these initial codes, I found that this code, employer flexibility, and let's say family support, another initial code. Let's say these two codes have a more frequency across the participant. So all the participants are referring to this phenomenon, this focus, this experience of employer flexibility. And also all the participants talk about family support. So more frequency, and also based on my experience interviewing these people, it seems that this code has high level of analytic power to explain the phenomenon that I'm exploring here, which is understanding how parents are balancing their full-time job careers and raising kids. So first step is initial coding, and then I look at the codes which shows high level of frequency as well as analytic power. And then I will do, the third step is I will focus on these two codes and do focus coding on these two codes. So what will I do? I'll go back to the data. So let's say in this case, I had interviews. So I'll go back to the interview transcript, go back to the segment of the data which talks about this employer flexibility piece and family support piece. And then I will go and recode, try to understand the complexity and the variations which is involved in this particular code here. And then I will code those there. So what might happen? So let's say if I'm employer flexibility, let me write it here. Employer flexibility. When I did focused coding with this code, let's say some sub-themes emerged from the data. What are those sub-themes? Remote working option. So employers, parents shared that the employer flexibility in terms of remote working options for them. They can work from home if they have a problem coming to office because they have to take care of the kids. And let's say they also offer another sub-themes which emerged is flexible hours. Let's say there is another sub-themes which emerged from the focused coding, recoding of that particular code, which is understanding from management. And this is my focused coding. So first step, I have a list of the initial codes, and then I determine which are the codes that have more analytic power, more frequency, more prominence. And then I went back to the data and did further coding of that segment of the data. And you see, employer flexibility, which was the initial codes, came up with 3 subcodes, which is remote working options, flexibility, flexible hours, and understanding from the company's management or office management. And this process of going back and recoding is, we call it focused coding. Focused coding is as the word itself says, focused. So it's like having a searchlight. So what happens in, like, if you have a torch or a searchlight, what you do, these searchlight, they do not focus on the whole, if I'm having a searchlight and I'm flashing it here, it will not help me see the whole room here, but it will help me understand, see very clearly the focus of the light. And this is what happens. We use our focus on not all the initial codes, but certain codes which have a high prominence, high level of frequency, high power of analytic explanation of the phenomenon. And then we focus on those codes, go deeper into those codes, and then we look at sub-themes or maybe some further coding and maybe some variations that we see across participant, and we do those codings. And this is called focused coding process. I hope this explanation, as well as the example that we took in here, helped you understand what focused coding look like. And as you know, this is a second cycle of coding that is very popular across various research designs. Initially, it was started by grounded theorists, and they started using it. But nowadays, because of its popularity and power, power in the sense analytic power, this is used across different qualitative data analysis approaches. So I hope this helped you get a better sense of this coding approach. And I'll see you again in another video with another second cycle of coding approach. Till then, have a good rest of the day and be happy, and I'll see you soon.